Welcome to your summary of your reading assignment for today. The main theme of your reading was discovery science. However, it also alluded to another type of scientific exploration, what your book called hypothesis-based science. Even though they have two different names, the goal of both of those different types of exploration is the same. The goal of science in general is to answer questions about the scientific world. That is the goal of science. Now, how we go about answering those questions is different. In discovery science, it emphasizes observation, data collection, and describing those natural processes. In a sense, if you want to think about the question that it answers, is what is the world like? What is the natural world doing? Describing it. And as the book talked about, there's two basic ways to collect data about the scientific world. One is called quantitative data, and the other is called qualitative data. The names are very descriptive of each one. Quantitative data, the root word is like quantity there. Quantitative data is data that involves numbers, so measurements, counting, things like that. That is quantitative data. And in our project, we will be collecting quantitative data. For example, if you take a look down here at this leaf, some examples of quantitative data might be some measurements. For example, you could measure the distance across the leaf, like from one point to another. Or you might measure the mass of the leaf, or use a ruler again to measure the thickness of the leaf, something like that. However, there's lots of different things, given the right equipment, that you could collect as quantitative data about this leaf. The amount of sugar it produces by photosynthesis. You could even look at, if you had a spectrometer, the wavelengths of light that are reflected by this leaf to give it its nice green color, like the wavelengths in nanometers. That is also quantitative data. However, another type of data that can also be effective to use is what we call qualitative data. Root word quality there. Qualitative data is just a general description of you could say, the qualities of a phenomenon or an object. And so examples of qualitative data for this leaf, you might look at and say, those tips of the leaves are pointy. Some leaves don't have pointy leaves or pointy tips like that. Another example of qualitative data, if you don't want to describe the actual wavelengths of light, an easier way to say describe the wavelengths of light is just to say it's green. That is qualitative data. Or you might just give a general description instead of using measurements and just say it's a big leaf, like bigger than average for most other trees. That's qualitative data. And so discovery science makes use of both of these. Just describing nature, answering the question, what is the world like? However, our brain naturally starts to go to other questions and asking, why is the world like this? Why is the world like this is the realm of what we call hypothesis-based science, where there's questions and then you research those questions by doing experiments and predicting the results and testing your hypothesis. That, in a sense, is the scientific method. However, the scientific method starts with observation. The scientific method starts with discovery science, just describing it. And so one way to think about how we go from discovery science to hypothesis-based science is when we make scientific observations, it leads us to what we call inferences. For example, if you look at this Petri dish right over here, you might look at, there's some penicillin mold over here. This penicillin mold, by the way, is the same stuff that grows on like oranges and lemons. Sometimes it's green, but it's a mold, it's a fungus, and that mold is grown on the Petri dish. And actually, Alexander Fleming, the discoverer of the chemical penicillin, made this exact observation. He looked at his mold growing on the Petri dish and he said, hey, look at this. It's killing the bacteria around the outside of here. It's inhibiting the growth of the bacteria around there. And so from that, you can draw inferences. Inferences are conclusions based on your observations. Now, they can be influenced by the person's assumptions, which we'll talk about here in just a second. So a logical conclusion might be, if you look at this right here, molds kill bacteria. However, you do have to be very careful in making inferences because many inferences might go beyond what we can actually say. For example, we don't know that all molds kill bacteria. All we know is that this penicillin mold is killing bacteria. And so this statement right here, this inference right here, molds kill bacteria, you might say stretches the data. A better way to say it might be that penicillin fungi produce chemicals that kill bacteria. Specific penicillin. Now, that said, we don't know that it kills all bacteria. All we know is that it kills this particular staph bacteria. So even that one you could say stretches the data. And so a better statement would be penicillin fungi produce chemicals that kill staph bacteria. This is an inference that we could make, that there's something here killing those bacteria. Now, how does that work? Are these other questions true? Those are not necessarily off limits to science, but the test that we did here just can't answer those questions. This really shows how discovery science and the inferences that we make here can launch into other questions that involve testing, that involve hypothesis-based science. And this is exactly what we want to do in our project. We want our students that we're working with from St. John's to make an observation, observe a behavior, document that behavior with quantitative and qualitative data, and then make inferences from that. And so then they can go and test that further, and we'll take a look at that in later discussions. Another thing we can do with data that we collect is we can make generalizations. Generalizations are statements that bring together many different observations. For example, if you look at these guys right here, this is a monarch butterfly. This is a clownfish in a sea anemone. This is a tiger salamander. This is a monarch butterfly caterpillar. This is a poison dart frog, a Gila monster, or Gila monster, however you want to pronounce it, coral snake, and a red-bellied toad. What thing do these guys all have in common? Well, a couple things. Number one, they're all brightly colored, right? And number two, they're also all poisonous. And so a generalization that we might make is poisonous animals are brightly colored, or you can flip that around and say it the other way, brightly colored organisms are poisonous. And we make generalizations all the time. For example, I know many of you sophomores are very anti-freshmen, and so some of you might make a generalization, all freshmen smell bad. Okay, that's a generalization. Now the problem is that not all the believe it or not all the freshmen smell bad. Only some of them do. Same thing is true with other generalizations as well. You might look at this generalization and say, oh yeah, that's a good generalization. But what about these animals here? This is a viceroy. It's a butterfly. This over here is a king snake. Both of them brightly colored. However, neither one of them is poisonous. And so this generalization doesn't always hold true. Same thing down here. You might look at this little snake right down here and think, oh, he's not brightly colored. He must be okay to touch, right? Actually, no, that's a rattlesnake. You don't want to touch him. He'll bite you and kill you. And so in both of these cases, again, just like with inferences, these generalizations can be a launching point for questions that we can test scientifically with hypothesis-based science. For example, why would these non-poisonous animals be brightly colored? We'll take a look at that specific question later on. The book dives into that one very in detail. Or, for example, this guy over here, why, if he's poisonous, is he not brightly colored? Well, you might have a hypothesis there. Even though he's not brightly colored, he does have a rattle that he shakes around, right? And so maybe that's why he can afford to be not be brightly colored. And so with both of those can be launching points for questions to go and test scientifically. Animal behavior itself actually poses a great example of how we can look at scientific phenomena through discovery science. Animal behavior, I mean, really, as you read, it's defined as how an animal behaves in its environment. When there's changes, what's his response? And so, in terms of discovery science, this is really easy. You sit there and you observe the behaviors. You describe the behaviors. You collect data about the behaviors. And we want our students in our project to do this as well. We want them to observe a behavior in crickets and then be able to make inferences, draw conclusions from that. And then you guys are going to guide them in asking questions that we can go test using hypothesis-based science. You will be walking them through the scientific method. This is just the first step in that. And so you guys need to be able to describe what kind of data do we have here. How are we collecting, how are we going to report this data? Charts and graphs and things like that. Walking them through how to be good scientists, just like Jane Goodall, who collected observations of chimp behaviors over there in Africa. She just sat and watched the chimps all day, every day, observing and documenting their behaviors. Because if they don't, well, then they have problems. Hilarious comic. That's where I'll leave you with for today. Tomorrow, we'll be looking at some more examples of inferences, comparing them to observations, and moving into hypothesis-based science. See you tomorrow in class.